So let's move on. I hope you're enjoying the sessions that we've had so far on marketing. Continuing the same momentum on, let's move on to chapter 7, which talks about analyzing business markets. Now, we've analyzed the consumer behavior, we've analyzed intelligence, we've analyzed customer perception. We now want to just keep a little bit of brief, we analyze the business markets and how it impacts marketing decisions. So analyzing, remember a while ago I had spoken about business to business and business to consumer. Business to business is nothing else but business markets. Business to consumer is what we have seen so far, which talks about consumer behavior, which talks about marketing research, and which talks a little bit about competitor understanding and competitor benchmarking. Let's understand competition, of course, is what we understand, but let's understand B2B business because it has a different dynamics when we compare it with B2C. So organizational buying and business market. What is a business market? So a business market is a market in which you have firms that acquire goods and services which are used in the production of other goods and services. So basically raw materials, basically suppliers of goods and services which are used by companies to make finished products. So for example, you have raw cotton manufacturers which will offer products which is going to be offering full complete range of cotton goods, cotton shirts and cotton trousers, and therefore the supplier becomes a part of a business to business market which is going to help the final manufacturer manufacture, offer and provide these goods and services. Characteristics of business markets. The characteristics of business markets are there are less number of suppliers, large number of buyers. They have a very close relationship with the end user because they have less intermediaries and therefore they can understand their customers much better. They are into bulk buying, not bulk buying so much as they are into professional purchases of goods and services, and they have various kinds of demands that they grapple with. So they have derived demand, they have inelastic or price sensitive demand, fluctuating demand which sometimes goes up and sometimes goes down, geographically concentrated buyers, and direct purchases that they make. So various industries have business markets. You have agriculture, you have transport services, you have forestry, wood, you have communications, construction. So they are apparent in the primary, secondary as well as the tertiary sector of the economy. What are the characteristics of business markets? Let's try and understand them. Whether it's a business market or it's a consumer market, they have some peculiar characteristics and some similar characteristics. And in what ways are they similar? They also understand customer needs. Business markets, like consumer markets, must understand customer needs to be able to reach out to their customers and offer what their customers want or require. They also must identify opportunities of growth. They must improve value management techniques to ultimately create value to their end user, in this particular case, the businesses. They must have control metrics in place. They must they must attract, maintain, retain their customers just like you happen in a consumer's market. The competition is less in a business to business as opposed to in a consumer market. However, the decision making process is not so dynamic in business markets as it is in the consumer markets, and therefore once you enter into a relationship in a business market, it is more for a medium term, at least a year, 2 years, 3 years. You're not going to be changing that relationship because the cost to change is much more than cost to start a new relationship. That's what we talked about in terms of differences to the consumer market. It is geographically concentrated. It more thrives on personal relationships. There are less players in the industry. There are more professional buyers, so you're looking at end users rather than intermediaries using your goods. It is less competitive, yes. At the same time, the conversion to sale takes slightly longer because you have multiple sales calls that need to be continuously made, reinforced before a decision can be made. So, industrial goods like compressors, like mechanical springs, like industrial goods, all of these, your power tools, all of these are more business to business markets as opposed to business to consumer markets. Uh, what kind of buying situations do these guys grapple with? They are grappling with either first time purchasers of goods and services, where they have to educate them in terms of what they are offering, how they are offering, what their terms of trade or references are. Straight rebuy, purchasing department reorders supplies on a routing basis from supplier to supplier. uh, Most organizations nowadays, through the procurement department, have an ABC list of their vendors, in which they will deal with vendors with an A list, followed with a B list, and then lastly with a C list who they do not wish to or want to approach. Modified rebuy, buyer wants to modify product specifications, prices, delivery requirements, or other terms, and this is what they will be wanting to do to be able to modify and bring about changes that they wish to bring about. So these are some examples that we saw. Straight rebuy is to actually purchase it and then offer it, as we see. New task is convert them into a new relationship with the person. And then modified rebuy is they want to make changes to the terms of reference or terms of trade and then get into a relationship. Systems buying and selling, you have the buyer, you have the prime contractor, and then your sublist or subprime contractor also, especially seen in the real estate business, wherein the real estate project has various partners to it, and you have contracted and subcontracted it to people to be able to get the best out of the different specialities that you are going to get as a contractor and subcontractor. So how is their buying decision making process? Their buying decision making process, like the consumer decision making process, starts with an initiator or a user. They also have an influencer. They also need to decide what needs to be decided. However, they have somebody in between them called as an approver. That's where procurement strikes in, saying you want to approve, not approve. The gatekeeper, in terms of an assessment being done, and then finally a purchase decision made in terms of whether to buy or not buy. So the initiator or user and the buyer at times may be the same person or maybe a different person, but within the same organization. Buying center influences, how are they influences? We saw consumer behavior influences. In this particular case, their influences are differed by they have interests, they have various interests in the organization. So different groups of people, the functional heads, the IT heads, the procurement heads, are all examining the proposal from their eyes to ultimately see that the organization overall benefits from this relationship. The authority is something in terms of who is going to have the authority to move ahead or to own it, and what is the status, the decision criteria, and the persuasiveness that is going to be involved to be able to manage and work ahead with those different business to business contacts that has been made with by the organization. Targeting firms and buying centers. So in their case, who is their target market? Their target market is obviously not consumers, but their target market are corporates or institutions who are going to be using their goods and services to ultimately manufacture the final good or service, which is then going to be reaching out to the end user or consumer or customer, as the case may be. So anytime when the purchases are made and the procurement process happens, you are going to look at another two components on which the evaluations are happening. One is the technical component, and the other one is the cost. The technical aspects are evaluated by the functional and the other users, whereas the procurement benefits or the cost benefits are examined by procurement team. In this particular case, what is extremely relevant is you all parties involved must have a satisfactory opinion about the supplier to be able to get into a relationship, so that all functions, all aspects within the different functions are able to work towards a common goal with the involvement in the decision, with the involvement in a partnership, in this particular case a B2B partnership. So what is their buying process? Their buying process is similar to the consumer process. They also have a need for a problem. They have a description and characteristics of what are they specifically requiring, what needs is it going to fulfill. They will search for the supplier in terms of which is the best supplier, the credentials of the supplier, the achievements of the supplier, the positive votes of the supplier, proposal solicitations in terms of recommendations, uh, in terms of, at times some organizations even do something called as proof of concept, which is POC, wherein a supplier, especially for an IT project, will have to do a proof or a program or a small scale to ensure that they have capabilities and they are able to perform up to clients' satisfactions, whatever the client has asked them to do in terms of their user requirements. Once the proposals are solicited, the proposals are submitted, the proposals are evaluated, the suppliers are then selected based on a criteria, and this criteria then leads them into a legal sign up of a relationship. You specify the order and then you review the supplier in terms of supplying things on time as per requirements, and then the service that it is offered in terms of quality of service and quality of goods and services that they have provided. There is no defective product that has been offered. They have given them good terms of reference. All these are review criterias on which you are going to review the supplier and then categorize them maybe as an A rated supplier, a B rated supplier, or a C rated supplier whom you don't want to encourage or engage into because they're not meeting your specific needs and requirements. Uh, a little bit of detail on each one of them. Again, recognition, like the consumer process, had both an internal stimuli as well as an external stimuli. Internal stimuli could, in this case, be not an internal customer need, but there is a problem with something that I'm having. I want to upgrade something. I have low stock levels. I want to introduce new products. These are typically internal stimulus that helps you decide that you want a new product. The external stimulus are things like I want to uh, roll out an ad, or I want to do a trade show visit, or things of that kind. Uh, Description and characteristics. I have now these technical specifications on which you are evaluating the supplier has to be told to the supplier ideally while they are submitting their requirements or proposals, and these are usually a mix of price, of course, safety, security, durability, and reliability. It's a mix of these that are put into the criteria, and this criteria helps you to evaluate the supplier to be able to take that decision. Moving on to supplier search, either you can get from your references in the industry or you can get from your searches, trade directories. You can attend trade shows that can give you a list of suppliers. Various advertisements or trade advertisements that appear in magazines all can be used to be able to look at existing suppliers or new suppliers, because to be able to get into a relationship with them for B2B business. Some organizations at times have an objective in their management by objective saying, uh, we are going to be entering into X number of new strategic relationships this year, And what are these new relationships going to do? They're going to help you provide cost advantages once you enter into an agreement with them. So these new relationships or these new suppliers whom you're going to source are available through trade directories, advertisements, or trade shows that you would have visited. And that's a brilliant source of networking and getting to know your suppliers who may want to use in the future. Steps therefore in the buying process, you obtain proposals. Many a times when you obtain proposals, you obtain proposals from 5 of these and you want to shortlist to top 2 or top 3. You might ask the top 2 or top 3 to submit all 5, but the top 2 or 3 to come and make a formal presentation to the concerned audiences or the concerned stakeholders, who can ask whatever questions they want to ask to the team of the supplier before they can make that final decision. A formal presentation is usually done with organizations that are shortlisted to be able to understand their capabilities, see clarifications on their submissions, get more confidence in terms of the work that they have done before you can actually make a decision whether to engage them, whether to recommend them first, and then to engage them. Uh, Supplier selection, with all of these aspects done, you give a score to the supplier, which is a composite score made up of technical as well as commercial evaluations. And then based on the number of proposals that you got, uh, you can arrange them in a descending order, saying from these are the topmost to the bottommost, and then shortlist the top 3. And then from the top 3 you can then again have a round of presentation or discussion, and then ultimately select the top supplier that you want to go ahead with. uh, Most of us face this challenge of saying there's a complete disconnect between a technical evaluation and a procurement evaluation, and it's very difficult to then choose a supplier which is technically strong but commercially not meeting the criteria, or which is commercially very strong but technically not meeting the criteria, and therefore we don't want to have problems. The challenge now is to have a balance so that both are working in tandem to be able to make that particular decision that you want to make. Order specifications, once you are getting into a contract, your legal agreement has been signed off, you then start talking about how many such orders do you want, when do you want, what are your return policies, what are your warranties, what are your terms of credit. So you lay down the different order specifications to be able to then implement or avail of those from the supplier that you have chosen. Uh, just selecting a supplier is not good enough. Uh, some don't do it, some do it very informally, but you must have a structure in place, or a formal structured feedback mechanism in place by which you are going to evaluate your supplier. This supplier is generally evaluated on a variety of factors or aspects, and these aspects are generally listed down with a score given to the supplier, and then a certain weight is given to that particular score. So ultimately, you get a weighted score, and based on that, the supplier is evaluated to meet the criteria of saying should you continue with this supplier, or you might not want to continue with the supplier, and therefore you might want to move that supplier from an A to a B to a C, or vice versa from a B to an A category, depending on the work that you have done. What I'm trying to say is no matter what happens, the performance review mechanism should be adopted by organizations, not just adopted, but should be religiously followed to be able to select your supplier. So this is an example of how you can evaluate a supplier, the various stages. Need description, product specification, is it a new task, modified rebuy, or a straight rebuy, and then you can decide between what is it, yes, no, maybe, to be able to decide what you need to do with your suppliers whom you have requested proposals from. Managing B2B relationships. Slightly less complex than B2C relationships. Uh, why so? Because the decision to purchase or the time to purchase is not as frequent as a consumer good or service, and hence what happens is, you know your clients, you can meet them regularly, there's a finite number of people, you can reach out to them either personally or through online social media, various platforms. You don't have to have a large sales force or a huge campaign to reach out to them. Relationship is extremely important. The more frequently you meet with them, the better they are able to understand your competencies. You are also able to understand their needs on a more frequent, dynamic manner to be able to ensure that you are offering what they need or require. And this offering, need, and requirement is in line with what you offer and what they are requesting at that point of time. Buyer seller relationship categories, various one, but of course everything is moving around the fact that your customer is of pivotal importance, and it is right in the center of every decision that you are making. All relationships must be collaborative and mutually benefiting, not a one way relationship that is benefiting only the supplier or only the manufacturer. Building business relationships, some aspects which need to be mindfully thought of is credibility and trust. If you want your supplier to be your partner, then you must express, share all relevant information that you have about the organization with your supplier. If you're engaging a research partner, you cannot hide researches that are being done by your organization in the past, because if you hide, then you cannot express, then you cannot work together, you cannot let the best information out of the researcher, which is going to be a compromise on the research project, and that's something that you don't want to talk, don't want to experience. Hence, credibility and trust is very important, both parties, and this credibility and trust is important because it's going to help build long lasting relationships. Risks. Many a times, organizations are looking at entering into a relationship or entering into a contract not with a reputed party but with an experienced party. What I'm trying to say here is, with number of startups coming up in this market, people are willing to explore, venture out to these startups and make partnerships with them rather than use established names and spend huge costs to be able to not get what you want to get out of this. And lastly, uh, no means are you going to not explicitly state what you need, sign off on what you need, and then make no changes to what you signed off on because it suits that time of day, because it suits that group of people. Institutional and government markets. Of course, institutional and government markets are mainly to do with public sector in terms of schools, institutions, hospitals, government agencies. You're also entering into relationships with government agencies and government run organizations. However, the selection process there is slightly more bureaucratic. Right from the time a tender request is issued, to a tender being issued, to a uh, evaluation of the tender and signing off of the tender. Any and every activity for a public institution or a not-profit institution starts with a tender and then moves accordingly. So building business relationships is more is similar to business building consumer relationships. The only task here is what we need to while the process is the same, it is less complex, and it is more focusing on relationship building as opposed to more focusing on aspects which lead to advertising or social media platforms, or even aspects in terms of regular communication with business to business. You want to regularly communicate, but you will regularly communicate through meeting them in person as opposed to meeting them through an informal means of communication. So that's more or less what business to business communication is all about. What is important for you to know is also, like what you've done, when you go back, you can refer all of these back to your organization, saying whether your organization is government, profit, not for profit, what is it? What is its marketing function doing? Do you capture research? Is it business to business or is it business to consumer? Is it do you have are you in the FMCG business, durable business, services business, and how do you actually reach out to your consumers or to your businesses who are intermediaries? And that's what you could do and relate all of this back to your respective organizations. Thank you very much.